Hey folks, Jackdaw here. Obsidian is heading straight back to Eora, the rich 16th century inspired fantasy world of Pillars of Eternity, but this time with Avowed, they're taking us to the Living Lands, a far northern and completely uncharted frontier. Now, whether you're new to Eora, vaguely aware of Pillars of Eternity, or a hardened veteran of the Watcher's saga, you're probably wondering, how much does Avowed connect to the past games? What's the story setup? How does the world work, and why should I care, Jackdaw? Well, that's exactly what we're tackling today. By the end of this video, you'll have a full grasp of the lore, character choices, companions, combat, and moral dilemmas that will shape your journey in the Living Lands once Avowed drops. No loose ends, just everything we know so far presented in the way that makes most sense. So, let's begin. Set a few years after Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire, though not dependent on it, Avowed puts you in the boots of the Envoy, a custom hero sent to the Living Lands on a mission of, shall we say, diplomacy, which is a very, very light way of putting it. You see, your directive comes from the powerful, often morally grey Eora Empire, an imperial force combining both elven and human heritage that fancies itself the rightful ruler of these far-flung territories. It's the kind of empire that sees itself as destined to rule, whether that means trade agreements, military occupation, or good old-fashioned divine right. And yet, for all its power and prestige, your arrival in the Living Lands doesn't exactly go to plan. Your ship is shot down before you even make it to shore. You see, the locals here don't trust the Eora Empire, and given the Empire's history, it's easy to see why. Worse still, the region is being ravaged by a pernicious affliction known as the Dream Scourge, a soul-corrupting plague that's twisted the land, its creatures, and the people into something just plain wrong. And so, within minutes of starting the game, you go from an imperial representative to a stranded outsider, forced to carve your own path in a world that essentially doesn't want you there. And to make things just a tiny bit more complicated, it turns out that your character isn't just any ordinary Kith, which is the common races of Eora. You're a Godlike, a mortal child of the so-called civilized races who's been uniquely touched by divine influence at birth. Let's talk about what that actually means. So if you played Pillars of Eternity, you may know that Godlikes were mortals born touched by the gods, physical manifestations of divine influence that could take the form of horns, luminous skin, or something altogether less pleasant. Some saw them as blessings, others as curses, and many just simply saw them as problems. But in Avowed, things are a little different than in Pillars. Here, you don't actually know which god touched you. There's some kind of a mystery that I think we're going to have to unravel, and one that will likely be shaped to the main story and how the world reacts to you. What is certain though is that your presence does not go unnoticed. Godlikes are rare, unnatural, and incapable of reproducing themselves. So in some cultures, they are worshipped, in others, they are ostracized, but everywhere they're watched closely. So the moment you step foot in the Living Lands, people are going to have opinions about you. Some good, some bad, and some just downright conspiratorial. Now, unlike Pillars of Eternity, where you could pick from a wide variety of races, here you are locked to choosing between a human or an elf, because frankly, it just wouldn't make sense for the Eora Empire to send an Orlan or an Almauer as its representative. But within those confines, you are in complete control, and that ties into being a godlike too, because you can customize your appearance from glowing veins, bark-like skin, to downright bizarre features like fungal growth, supernatural horns, or something even stranger based on what we've seen so far of character customization. Now, beyond aesthetics, you are also able to choose a background between an arcane scholar, a court augur, a noble scion, a vanguard scout, or a war hero. Your choices here won't lock you out of any particular weapons, abilities, or builds. It will just give you some starting weapons, and it will affect how NPCs treat you and how you can approach certain situations within dialogue. Now, the Dream Scourge is Avowed's current looming catastrophe. At first, it seems like some kind of magical disease, but the more we uncover, the more it apparently becomes clear that it's something far older, far deeper, and far more insidious. According coming to PC games, everyone has a theory about what caused it. Some say it's a punishment from the gods, and others whisper that it's an unnatural force unleashed by past sins. The Adirian Empire, unsurprisingly, sees it as a threat to be eradicated, a festering wound in need of imperial order, and your choices will apparently determine how you respond to this crisis. Do you aim to crush it under the Empire's heel? Do you try to understand it and bend it to your will, or do you side with those who believe it's merely a symptom of deeper oppression? There's no right answer, only consequences, some immediate, and some that might not reveal themselves until much, much later. This isn't a game where the right answer is always obvious, as game director Kerry Patel explained to Xbox Wire. Avowed wants players to engage with its systems naturally, making choices without always knowing their full impact up front. Now let's talk about how Avowed actually plays. Structurally, this isn't a free-roaming, go anywhere, you see that mountain, you can climb it kind of RPG. This isn't Skyrim, while I do understand the comparisons and we will actually make a comparison soon. But instead, Avowed opts for a carefully curated mix of open-ended exploration and narrative structure, with each location serving as its own richly detailed biome, filled with secrets, quests, loot, and conflict. Think of it more like the Outer Worlds, where every zone is a self-contained, handcrafted hub brimming with content. And your journey kicks off in Dawnshore, a major coastal region that serves as your first proper sandbox. After surviving the wreck that strands you here, you're essentially let loose. Free to explore, take on side quests, poke around some forgotten ruins, chat with the townsfolk, or just beeline straight into that main story. The Extra Life's hands-on preview indicated that this single zone alone could take anywhere from 6 to 10 hours to fully explore, depending on how obsessively you chase every single lead, uncover all the chests, which they said there were a lot of, and throw yourself into every single fight. And speaking of which, unlike the top-down tactical movements of Pillars of Eternity, in Avowed, you're going to be running, climbing, and vaulting your way across the environment in a first-person perspective. There's no mount system or anything like that. Obsidian's opted for a more compact, layered level design. Instead, though, there is that extra level of verticality, rewarding those who are willing to scale ledges, sneak through crevices, and find little nooks and crannies where developers have hid things. The Extra Life likened Avowed more to Dying Light in that regard than anything else. And so on the surface, Avowed's combat takes clear inspiration from Skyrim. It's fast, flexible, first person, and built around player choice. You can mix and match melee, ranged, and spellcasting however you like, slinging fireballs with one hand while swinging an axe with the other, or picking off enemies from a distance with a bow. But apparently, magic is stupidly powerful, so much so that right now in its current state, it feels borderline essential for any build. Traditional melee and ranged classes like Fighter and Ranged only get 4 active abilities each, and that's not a lot of options, especially in a game that does encourage that kind of experimentation. And so if you build a pure Fighter or a pure Ranger, you might find yourself running alarmingly low on variety or just getting a bit bored, limited to basic swings, parries, and then the occasional cooldown ability. Meanwhile, your wizards have an arsenal of tools at their disposal, spells that deal damage, spells that control the battlefield, spells that enhance movement, spells that warp enemy behaviour. It makes combat feel dynamic in a way that melee just simply doesn't. And so this means, as it currently stands, hybrid builds will likely dominate, whether that's kind of a Spellblade style fighter wizard, or a ranger with magical traps and buffs, or just something in between. Now this was just Extra Life's general take, having played the game early. You can also respec your skill points for a small fee, meaning that if you do start out as a sword wielding warrior and realise that you would actually rather just become a full-on hurling lightning wizard, you won't be locked into a bad decision. It is a flexible system that lets you adapt your build as you go, which I think is always a welcome feature, especially in a game as versatile as this. Now, what's an Obsidian RPG without a ragtag bunch of companions to love, argue with, and annoy with your moral choices? Well, Avowed lets you bring 2 companions along at a given time. They have strong, distinct personalities, but somewhat limited mechanical depth. We already know a fair bit about Kai, an Almawa warrior and former mercenary, voiced by none other than Brandon Keener. That's Garrus Vakarian for all you Mass Effect trilogy fans. Dry-witted, reliable, and always ready with a quip, Kai seems to serve as a grounding presence amidst the chaos of getting into the living lands. From what we've seen so far, you get him pretty early, and he's the closest thing to a traditional tank, able to soak up damage and hold his own in a fight. Then there's Giata Castel, an animancer from Fior Mez Everno, whose interest in the nature of souls and forbidden research put her at odds with the Empire, so interesting to see how she may clash or connect with our character. She's got a rebellious streak, a fascinating backstory, and a device called the Phantasmal Focus, which is somehow tied to her family's downfall. Thirdly, we have Marius, a rugged, no-nonsense mountain dwarf from Pargranen, and he's a ranger by trade, but he's also a hunter, a tracker, and by all accounts, someone who prefers the wilderness to polite society. Apparently, we're going to be able to recruit him in a region known as Gallowayne's Tusks, a name that already suggests we'll be dealing with something rather beastly. And lastly, there's Yatzli, a Hearth-Orlan scholar from the Emerald Stair. A wizard through and through, Yatzli's connection to magic makes her a fun addition, especially in a world where magic and souls are intrinsically linked. Now, unlike Pillars of Eternity, where you had deep mechanical control over your party, in Avowed, it seems like party companions operate with limited customization. You can command them to use abilities, but apparently we can't outfit them with new gear or tweak their AI, according to Vextralife. And if this is the case, this streamlined approach is definitely going to be disappointing, especially if you do enjoy micromanaging every particular aspect of your party, or even just giving them a new look. Though I suppose it does help keep you focused on your own character's build. Unfortunately, if you were hoping to romance your favourite companion, you are out of luck. There is no romance in Avowed, which this kind of makes sense given your godlike nature. It's still a bit of a letdown for those of us who do love narrative-driven relationships. That being said, what Avowed does have is strong character writing, meaningful choices, and plenty of banter. So while you might not be whispering sweet nothings into Kai's ear, you can still forge deep bonds through moral dilemmas and story interactions. Again, similar to the Outer Worlds. And so Avowed is shaping up to be, I think, one of the most intriguing RPGs of the year, blending Obsidian's signature style with a more fluid, immersive combat system. It's got big choices, strong characters, and an open-ended structure that lets you approach the story your way. But as always, the devil is in the details. Will combat be balanced enough to make melee and ranged builds viable? Will companions have enough interactivity to actually feel dynamic? And just how massive is this story going to get once we start uncovering the secrets of the Dream Scourge? Well, we'll find out very, very soon. For now, let me know what you think. Are you excited for Avowed? What playstyle are you thinking of trying first? And most importantly, do you wish you could romance Kai or Giata? Because let's be honest, I already do. Until the next one, I have been Jackdaw, and you're in the right place for the latest on a bunch of fantasy RPGs like Avowed and Fable. But until then, I should go. Whoa, 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 whoa.